Hidden deep within the rolling wilderness of southwestern Vermont lies a stretch of land that locals speak of only cautiously, as if naming it aloud might wake something ancient and listening beneath the pines. This region, roughly centered around the long-abandoned town of Glastenbury and the dense forest surrounding it, would come to be known by folklorists as the Bennington Triangle, a name that only partially captures the strangeness of what unfolded there between 1945 and 1950. It is a place where compass needles spin in quiet rebellion, where radio signals die without warning, and where, for 5 bewildering years, people vanished as though the forest had swallowed them whole. What makes the Bennington disappearances so unsettling is not merely the number of people who vanished, but the pattern linking the cases. Each disappearance occurred along a loosely aligned route cutting across the same wild, unforgiving terrain. Each occurred without witnesses, without evidence of struggle, and with a near-total absence of footprints, even in winter snow. And each, according to those who lived near the mountains at the time, was preceded by the same eerie phenomenon, a sudden hush settling over the woods, as if the natural world momentarily held its breath. To understand the dread that still clings to this region, imagine yourself walking through the forests of Glastenbury Mountain in late autumn. The air carries a moist chill. Fallen leaves muffle each step. The canopy transforms daylight into something dimmer, older. The usual forest chorus, songbirds, wind, insects, fades to a sparse whisper. Locals say this quietness isn't natural. It feels constructed, like a curtain drawn over something hidden. Long before the vanishings, native Abenaki stories warned that the mountain was cursed, a place where the earth swallowed those who disrespected it. Hunters spoke of strange lights gliding between the trees at night, too bright for lanterns, too silent for vehicles. Early settlers described encountering zones of unnatural stillness, pockets where even the wind refused to blow. Such tales were dismissed for decades as superstition, until the disappearances began, and the stories suddenly felt less like folklore and more like warnings. The first disappearance occurred in November 1945, when Mitty Rivers, an experienced woodsman and hunting guide, familiar with every ridge and hollow of Bennington's forests, led a group of 4 hunters into the mountains. Rivers walked slightly ahead, as he always did. He paused at streams, pointed out tracks, and joked that he could find his way home blindfolded. His confidence was genuine. He had spent his entire life navigating the wilderness. But as the party moved down a familiar trail on the return trip, Rivers drifted a few paces ahead around a bend. When the hunters caught up, he was gone. At first they assumed he had stepped off the path to examine a deer trail. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, panic seeped in. The search that followed became one of the largest in Vermont history. Yet not a shred of clothing, equipment, or bone was ever recovered. Even more unsettling, trackers found no footprints leading away from where Rivers was last seen. The ground in that area, damp, soft, impressionable, should have recorded every step. Instead, it offered only emptiness. Some searchers reported hearing faint whistles during those nights, as if Rivers were signaling for help. But the sounds never seemed to come from the same direction twice. 1 year later, on December 1st, 1946, the Bennington Triangle claimed its most famous victim, 18-year-old Paula Jean Weldon, a college sophomore who set off alone to hike part of the long trail. The crisp winter afternoon was bright but frigid, and several witnesses saw her walking confidently toward the foothills. One described her as cheerful. Another remembered she seemed deep in thought. Not one reported seeing her return. What happened next cemented the region's reputation as a place where normal rules no longer applied. A massive search effort was launched, involving soldiers, police, students, and volunteers. Planes circled overhead. Bloodhounds were brought in and reportedly followed her scent for several miles before abruptly losing the trail as if Paula had simply evaporated. Witnesses later came forward with contradictory stories. A couple claimed to have seen her ahead of them on the trail before she rounded a corner and vanished. A man at a nearby cabin insisted she had never reached that part of the trail at all. Some said she'd spoken to a stranger in a red coat. Others claimed she was alone. The forest itself seemed to resist the search. Compasses malfunctioned. Dogs whined and refused to enter certain ravines. The snow that fell during the search oddly contained no footprints, even in areas where Paula would have had to walk. Her disappearance attracted nationwide attention, but like rivers before her, she left behind no trace. No clothing, no body, nothing. 3 years passed before the next disappearance, this time involving a man who vanished not in the woods, but on a moving bus. In December 1949, James E. Tedford, a veteran returning from a visit to family, boarded a bus heading toward the town of Bennington. Several passengers remembered him reading a timetable as the bus rattled through the mountain roads. Others recalled him staring out the window, as if watching something moving through the trees. When the bus reached Bennington, however, Tedford was gone. His belongings remained neatly arranged on his seat: folding timetable, suitcase, and a book. But the man himself had simply disappeared somewhere between the previous stop and the station. Passengers could not agree on when he was last seen. Some thought he'd been on the bus just minutes before arrival. Others admitted they hadn't seen him for several stops. No one remembered witnessing him leave, because the only exits were at the front and rear, both in plain sight. It was as if the moment the bus entered the Bennington Triangle, Tedford had stepped into another world. Less than a year later, in October 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson disappeared while his mother tended to chores on a small farm near the mountain's base. Paul had been known to wander, but only short distances. When his mother turned back, he was gone. Police dogs followed Paul's scent toward the very same path where Paula Weldon had vanished 4 years prior, then abruptly lost the trail at a clearing where the forest became strangely still. Paul's father later claimed he had seen bright, pearl-colored lights moving through the woods the night before his son disappeared. Locals brushed it off as stress, but in private, many admitted they had seen similar lights over the years. Despite extensive searches, the boy was never found. The last disappearance in this strange cluster occurred just 16 days after Paul's vanishing. Frida Langer, a seasoned hiker camping with family, slipped into a small stream and decided to return to camp to change clothes. She was accompanied by her cousin, who watched her walk back along the trail. It was broad daylight. She was familiar with the area. The walk to camp was short, but Frida never arrived. Unlike the others, her body was eventually found, months later, in an area that had already been searched thoroughly multiple times. Even stranger was the condition of the remains. The level of decay far exceeded what the environment and timeline suggested, leaving investigators baffled. No cause of death could be determined. It was the only physical evidence ever recovered from the vanishings, and it raised more questions than it answered. Taken together, the disappearances share a number of improbable coincidences. All occurred within a narrow geographic corridor. Several happened near the same section of trail. All victims vanished without footprints, without signs of struggle. Animals and trackers consistently behaved as if something unseen was present. Strange lights, whispers, and silence preceded many vanishings. The forest seemed to reset itself, erasing scents, tracks, and disturbances. Some searchers even reported hearing their own names whispered through the trees, though no one else had spoken. Others felt watched, followed, or briefly disoriented, as if the forest didn't want them there. Over the decades, theories have multiplied. Some insist the disappearances were caused by a clever predator, human or animal, who knew the land better than any search party. But this fails to explain the vanishing footprints, the bus disappearance, or the complete lack of remains. Others point to the geological oddities of Glastenbury Mountain, including magnetic anomalies that disrupt compasses. But magnetism alone cannot erase people. Paranormal theories range from interdimensional rifts to time slips to the mountain being a kind of window area, a place where reality thins. Folklorists note that nearly every culture has legends of forests that take people. The Bennington Triangle simply has more evidence and more witnesses than most. The Abenaki stories are the most haunting. They speak of an ancient entity tied to the mountain, one that lures those who wander too far. Not a monster exactly, but a force of nature with its own rules. By the early 1950s, the disappearances stopped as abruptly as they had begun. People continued to avoid the deeper forests, but no new cases emerged with the same pattern or intensity. It was as if whatever hunted those trails for 5 years had moved on, or become dormant. Today, hikers still report odd sensations on Glastenbury Mountain: sudden dizziness, brief memory lapses, voices that vanish when you turn your head, a sense that the forest is waiting. The land remains empty, quiet, and watchful. And though decades have passed, none of the vanished, except for the strangely returned body of Frida Langer, have ever been found. The Bennington Triangle endures as one of America's most chilling and least understood mysteries, a place where the line between the ordinary and the impossible is thinner than the mist drifting through its ancient pines.